Hello, everyone. Larry Bailey here with KensieMae. Today, we're going to be reviewing the 18.1 February Service Pack, aka 18.1.0.4, both server patch as well as client update, which is also the February Service Pack. So rather than go through all the notes line by line, I thought I might give you just a summary and make sure you know which page to find things on. There are 54 pages in the actual PDF. See the link here at the top. You can get to it from your resource center or follow along the link that's here in the blog. In any event, what's important to really know about this release? First thing is if you're using TPO Connect, you've got some changes to be aware of. You can now manage your TPO Connect sites in the external company setup. It's important if you're using multiple sites now. Instead of having to go all the way out to the site, you can now manage it from inside the settings. Of course, you can also directly identify within each external company which TPO Connect site goes to which client. Just as a reminder, that's on the bottom of page 7. Into page 8, you've got two new relock settings. This is really important. This is mentioned a few times in the release notes. This affects everybody using secondary tool. So here's a scenario. You've got a loan that's locked on day 1 for 30 days. Day 30 comes and goes. The lock's now expired. There are some companies that will go in and manipulate the lock number of days and then provide for an extension. I guess that's okay. Other companies will do a brand new lock because that's the only thing you had. Now you have the ability to do relocks, which in effect carries over the original lock. It lets you recommit that loan on the buy side for either a certain number of times. You have a checkbox for limit the number of relocks, as well as if there's a fee for each relock. So what Ellie did was they gave you some brand new fields in the secondary registration tool that behave just like any other field on there. So if you apply a brand new lock, that means that these relock entries and additional fee charges will actually be dropped out. You'll also have the ability to in your trades tool. So again, if you're working on a relock and you commit that loan to a new trade, then those fields will also be wiped out. So read the release notes again. It starts off on page 8. I'll mention it a couple more times moving forward where to find additional citations of this relock fields. But check that out. That's pretty significant. Again, if you use a secondary management. Some other points of note: you've got EPPS is now working correctly for loan eligibility for correspondent trades in English. It's now using the commitment date for historical pricing instead of using the current date for that pricing. Very important for those managing trades through EPPS. Come to 2018 support. You've got NA now appearing where it needs to in a few different places. That's at the bottom of page 10 into page 11 and into page 12. You've also got some changes on the ULDD. There's new data fields added if you're still using the ULDD screen for your delivery. You've got some new fields. Make sure that you understand also the property valuation method type has been, the field review option has also been removed from the property valuation method type. So that's another change. Some interesting news on the FHA front. At the bottom of page 13 into 14, you've got a new print form for the FHA Builder, certification of plans and specs and site. As a reminder, like we saw in the last release with the 4506T, make sure that you're going in to manage your user groups appropriately so that all of your members of your user groups can now see these new forms. It's also important too if you are currently supporting any type of loan form printing specific to FHA output forms or print forms, that you go in and manage those rules as well. You've got a new form, so in case you've got any rules to worry about, now would be the time. On page 15, two things to note. Decimal places are now supported on FHA loans for purchase price. So if before you were having some issues getting cents into your purchase price, you now have the ability. One really important thing here is if you've got that purchase price being calculated somehow, make sure that you're aware that the field, the field that Ellie's set up here will truncate any decimal place after the second, not round, but truncate. So if you're familiar with how truncating works in your field calc setups, you'll understand that no matter what decimal. So if it's .356, it just shows .35 on the screen, so it always rounds down. Another way to say truncate. Um, so it doesn't matter if it's .359, it's still going to only show .35. Very important. Also at the bottom of page 15, you've also got the Spanish 1003 is no longer compliant. If you were using it, still continue to use it at your own accord. Make sure that it's still something you want to have out there. Moving into page 16, if you're using your own um, if you're using your own origination form, your own summary form, be aware of this. There is a refinance with original creditor field that's now being put into the ATRQM management input form, specifically field QM.X2. So if you're using the standard one from Ellie Mae from Encompass, you don't have to worry about it. But you definitely it's definitely recommended to add the refinance with original creditor checkboxes to any forms or data templates where your business would need to have that. So again, that's at page 18. Sorry, excuse me, page 16. Moving into page 17, this gets into a couple of things. Number one, Freddie Mac enhanced relief refinance option is now set up as an offering identifier on Freddie Mac loans. So that's important if you're doing those types. And again, that's at the top of page 17. In the middle bottom of page 17, this gets into the specific fields, the relock fees, as well as the custom price adjustment section. So if you're having a relock, it's not a relock fee, but you want to somehow include some other CPA, maybe it's some type of offset or worst case pricing adjustment, things like that. Those would be ideas. And again, that's at the bottom of page 17. Going into 18, it's a reminder again from Ellie that if you have any fees, it's now going to be cleared on a new lock. It's something I've talked about. And just as a point of note, if you're using the auto lock feature, again, it will clear out. It's considered a new lock, so it'll clear out these fields as well if you're using auto lock. Again, just as a reminder for the top of page 19, if you're doing copy from buy side and clear buttons, it's all part of all these new fields. These new fields will react accordingly, whether you're copying or whether you're clearing. It'll either copy those fields or clear them. For those that are using the analysis tool, bottom of page 19, you are now able to give that to a persona. So if you've got somebody who needs to know what business rule a particular field is in, they no longer need to be a super admin. You can assign that analysis tool to the persona level. Going into page 20, just a reminder, this is a note in here about the settings sync tool. Ellie's gone in and forced a setting so that you cannot have multiple administrators syncing data concurrently with the same source or the same destination with the setting sync tool. Just a soapbox moment here, guys. Be very, very careful with the setting sync tool. It continues to be pretty sexy in terms of what it can offer in terms of copying things over. Just be very, very careful. There's still plenty of examples of when the setting sync tool goes awry, whether it's user error or something where it's not configured exactly the way you think. So I can tell you at KensieMae, we're actually not permitted to use a setting sync tool whatsoever because we do not want to have the risk in any particular client's environment. We've seen things go very, very sideways. So be very, very careful with that. And of course, like I just said, you can no longer have two different administrators syncing from the same environment or to the same environment at the same time. Seems intuitive, but anyway, Ellie's not allowing you to do it anymore. You can now, like we said earlier, with the TPO Connect Site Management, you can now add that to personas. That's at the bottom of page 20. Going into page 21, it shows you the example of where to do that. Uh, the So at the bottom of page 21, if you're doing correspondent lending, you now have underwriting types, which is really overdue. I know of situations where you would have to customize if the underwriting is delegated or non-delegated for a particular loan file, but this is at the client level, so you can now within the basic info tab, you can now define what underwriting type is with that channel. By default, correspondent is selected to non-delegated. So you want to go through your TPO clients as soon as possible and make sure that the underwriting type is correct for each one of your TPOs. Going into page 22, read up on the TLS requirements for 1.2. This is for the E folder. This is an important thing administratively for your IT folks, you must upgrade to the new version of the scanned documents uploader prior to the transition of the TLS 1.2 on March 10th. So on your calendars, March 9th is hard stop city. You need to make sure that your computers are updated with the appropriate software. Go into the release notes. That's on page 22, page 23, and into page 24. It gives you exactly what to do, step by step. As long as you have administrative authority to your computers, it should be straightforward. Trade management, going into bottom of page 24, talks about how loans behave. If you're doing trade management, definitely go into page 24 so you can understand how those new functions work with loans loans that are canceled, as well as when what to do with those new fees when they're assigned to a correspondent trade. Some of the things that Ellie Mae is fixed on the server side, going now into page 25. Milestones are now sorting correctly. We saw over the weekend a bunch of alerts from Ellie fixing or dealing with some issues with some clients that had loans not showing up in the pipeline properly if you were not the admin. So hopefully everybody's set on that. Going down into page 26, some of the things that are updating on the forms and tools. You had a net sell price on the secondary registration not calculating properly. That's been fixed after it's been assigned to a trade. You also have on the correspondent purchase advice form now capturing both borrower and seller paid escrows. That was a problem on the server side. That's been resolved. Going down into page 26 on the client side machine. So again, this is for all of us that log into Encompass. You now have new entry types for those that were using 2010 forms. If you're using 2010 forms, go to page 27, read all about it. I'm not quite sure who's still doing that, other than maybe for HELOCs, but that's on page 27. 28 talks about how the checkboxes for the no co-applicant is now clearing correctly on the 2018 HMDA form. Good news for those that are trying to get their HMDA reports ready. So that's great, as well as updating, Ellie updated the logic used to populate the HMDA total points and fees. Thank you very much. This had a lot to do with when the HMDA type was set to number 6 for purchase loan. There were some issues with calculating HMDA, so that's been resolved. On the secondary side, conventional loan price is no longer rounding when the rate is locked and confirmed. That was a bizarre and not affecting everybody, but that manual workaround to go back and fix it after it's been locked is addressed. You also had some POC fees on the 2015 itemization that were populating on 2 different lines of the details of transaction section, weirdly enough, but it wasn't going over to the LE or the CD. So that's been resolved. That's at the, you'll find out more details about that if you want at the bottom of page 29. Going into page 30, you now have a fix for the maximum percentage of total loan amount. So what was happening here is the Ellie's added a lock icon next to the max percent of total loan amount for points and fees allowed. Just a side note here: if you don't have this in your environments already, there's a few freeware versions. KensieMae's got one as well that will let you know every field in that loan that is locked. If you're expecting to have fields locked in a loan, that's good. Then you could do it as a double check. It's a good way to spot check loans, especially in different stages of your loan's life cycle, to make sure somebody's not locking fields down that they're not supposed to. Also, as a side note, just keep in mind you can write persona access to fields rules to basically either view only or hide those lock icons on your input forms, just in case you didn't know. Bottom of page 30, for those that were doing a broker comp, for whatever reason, it was duplicating. I've seen this in some files where it was duplicating into the ATRQM section 32. That's been resolved. Something else that was happening too on the disclosure tracking. This is a weird one, and this is a reminder of going back into your business rules. For those that had business rules that prevented loan save events from happening after that would happen after, of course, the loan had been disclosed. So the situation is you go to disclose a loan, you forget to do something, your FDE rule fires, and it prevents loan saving. What Ellie's done is gone in and basically prevented any of the disclosure tracking history from being wiped out if that happens. That's at the top of page 31. Just as a reminder, if you've written rules that prevent loan save events, go back and reanalyze them. Make sure that you're not giving yourself a gap in terms of workflow. Preventing a loan from saving is not a bad idea in some circumstances. In others, you may want to, again, for those that were having this challenge, Ellie's gone in and provided a fix so that you don't have disclosure events being unrecorded, even if the borrower received the document, which can be terribly problematic. Some of the other things that have been fixed, we're down into page 31 now. Flood insurance premiums no longer doubled. Payoff and payment amounts in the other adjustment type now match input and output, aka print forms. So if you're looking at your screen and you go to print it, it actually matches. That's great. Going into page 32, when we have when you're importing a Fannie 3.2 file, I hadn't seen this, but apparently sometimes you get a property will be like your declarations, primary, second home, or investment. In terms of property occupancy, sometimes it would vary. So at this point, Ellie's gone in and fixed it, so all borrower pairs are now correct and are homogeneous. If you have spouse's income, again, here's another issue where you've got an issue that was causing other income amounts to fill. Ellie's also giving you a lock icon added on the spouse's income field, loan summary input form. Again, another lock icon. Just be aware in case you have people doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, that from a training perspective. Seller at the bottom of page 32, seller obligated fees no longer included in borrower FHA closing costs. That's nice, seeing how they've got nothing to do with the borrower. Also going into page 33, if you had any lender paid charges that you were seeing showing up on your 1098 mortgage interest forms this year, that's been resolved. Unfortunately, you can't go back and fix your 2017 1098s, but it's fixed for 2018. Going down into page 34, if you had any issues with your LTV, including your MIP into the loan for LTV calculations for 203K, that's been fixed. Details are on page 34. And then if you're still using the request for transcript of tax and the request for transcript of tax classic, so either one, you want to make sure that you're aware that the bullets are updated for the last sentence in 6B, 6C, and 8. It talks about counter days and business days. So you can read about that in case you didn't know it was changing. Now you are aware. Going into page 35 out of 54. So we're most of the way done here. You've got, if you're doing business in Illinois, go to page 34, read about it. There was an issue also with county names not populating correctly. That's been resolved. Also, now we're on page 35. If you had set the HMDA um, purchase type, origination type to purchase loan, you were also getting a ULI restriction of 14 characters. That's been resolved. It now sits at the standard 45. Thank you very much. Going into page 36, if you're doing purchase advices through your correspondent purchase advice form, the number of payments is now calculating properly. We also had some additional fixes for the high cost mortgage disclosures now available if you're doing 2010 forms. And if you were doing a so the last thing that's on page 30, what page are we on now? Page 36. So if we come in here and you go, see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Hey, look at that. So if we go into page 36, we can talk about loans that were imported via the loan mailbox, and then you apply the data template, and in your data template, the escrow taxes and insurance checkbox, field 1550, was not staying for you when it was checked. So that issue's been resolved if you've got that in your data templates. Maybe you built a business rule after the fact to trigger it. You can go and take a look to see if that's still required for you. On the eFolder side, there was an issue with Adobe Acrobat that's been resolved. You also had an issue with preview and custom forms. They were not being captured correctly in the disclosure tracking records. That's been addressed. Going into page 38, if you were using Encompass Consumer Connect, so Consumer Connect site, there's 3 things to be aware of starting on page 38. Number 1, talking about error messages when connecting the loan to a third party. You also had some issues when you were manually sending a request to the borrower. And then on page 40, you were having issues with the 4506T. So Consumer Connect has gotten some updates, gotten some love, and getting that stuff fixed. Administratively, going down into page 41, you now have, if you've ever gone into a reporting database as an admin recently, you get these 3 things that if you haven't already updated your reporting database, it's for North Carolina and some other ones you might have checked do not ask again, and then you feel like you're in a bad place because you don't know what field IDs they were. Good news is now at the bottom of the fields section on the left-hand side of the reporting database, you can see an example on page 42. You now have a preferences box, and then you can re-enable the notifications. So you can go back in and add them to your reporting database. Going into page 43, administrators can now modify users' persona setting to grant the right. So there was an issue with modifying the user rights. Some people call this breaking the persona. So in other words, this is not at the persona level, but you go into the user account and you want to modify those user rights to do something explicitly not defined in the persona. So you can now give them the explicit right to duplicate loans outside of the persona. That's available for you. Also, did not know this one, bottom of page 33, if you were in settings and you gave somebody the ability to do something in secondary setup, apparently you also gave them the right, even though you did not explicitly give them the checkbox, for lock desk setup. So that issue's been resolved. If you had any workaround for that, you can test to see if you now can restrict so that even though you can do other secondary setups, lock desk setup is not given to that group of team members by default. Some of the prorated fees were removed from the UCD section. So if you go into the itemization fee management setting, specifically UCD fee section, you'll see a litany of fees were removed. That's on page 44. Going into page 45. You also had an issue resolved if you're doing any notes on the user account, where you can type in notes. Apparently those characters were not wrapping correctly. That's been resolved. Going into page 46, business rules. Not many companies are using this local administrator, so just to take a moment to explain it, you can set up an administrator at some other folder besides the top level folder in your hierarchy. This is called, in Ellie world, it's called a local administrator. So what was happening was you, by default, users that were given local personas were not granted access rights to the business rules. So, so the issue's been resolved where they could access some nested rules and some other collateral tracking things that were on there. So at this point, Ellie feels very comfortable that if anybody has a local administrator, they cannot access business rules. Really helpful if you want to delegate any authorities out for user management or some other settings without having to worry about your corporate business rule settings. So that's actually good. It's actually great if you haven't considered using local administrators before. Now might be a good time to consider. There's an issue at the bottom of page 46 with the select all button for the adding 2015 itemization fields to the persona access to fields business rule. Going into page 47, sometimes in field triggers you'd get, uh, if you use, again, going back, you use this setting sync tool and you go into the destination and um, you get this weird kind of unknown milestone activation source. Soapbox time again. Setting sync tool. If both environments are not perfectly identical before you sync, I don't trust the setting sync tool. That's just what I've seen happen. That's just my personal belief. And you say, well, Larry, that's the whole point of a setting sync tool, brother. I mean, the whole point is you want to get both environments to be the same place. I understand that, and I get it. The reality is, if you're supporting multiple environments, hopefully you've got a solid change management. Another reason why we don't like the setting sync tool is because it removes the requirement to actually investigate to make sure that the source information that you're using for whether it's a trigger um, or a milestone or a persona, that it actually meets the requirements of the destination instance. And I know it sounds again like, hey Larry, I'm going from test into prod. Of course they should match. I'm just saying, sometimes they don't match. In a setting sync tool, we've seen bug out when source and destination don't match on every code line that it's reviewing in the tool. So again, once more, please be careful. But in any event, Ellie's resolved this issue of unknown milestone. The reality is your source had a milestone activation source in your business rule that your destination does not, and that's why there's a problem. Going into page 48, you've got if you're running reports on tasks, that's been resolved. And then to round out the release notes, if you're using SDK, you've got some error messages that were resolved on page 48, 49. And then after 49, the rest of this is change log. Just a reminder again, it's sometimes a really good idea to go to the end of these release notes. You can see the last entry was made on February 16th. Just as a reminder, this .4 release was dropped on February 17th. So just because it is or is not in release notes before the release, it's always a great idea to come back and review the release notes to see if there's anything in the change log, because there could have been something added or removed or anything. So thanks very much for listening to this. Hopefully it's not gone on too long for you. And as always, if there's anything here at KensieMae we can help with, please give us a call. Thanks very much.